It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.
And welcome to another podcast. Let's get her fired up. Why don't we go around the horn, introduce ourselves. We'll start with Chad.
Hi, I'm Chad Jettner.
I'm Peter Lawrence.
I'm Kyle Bacher, and joining us once again is the fantastic Nick Brecken. And
welcome, Nick.
Definitely welcome. Today we're going to talk about changing and shifting sand that is roles in IT stuff. How things have changed, how roles have changed, what have they morphed into, and have they morphed into anything or multiple things? And we can talk about that in terms of projects and other things. So products, all that stuff. So to kick this off, I'm going to ask Nick a very important question. What's the history of roles in IT? Starting about let's go back to 2010-ish. Let's go back to when project managers did things, and it was standard project management using Microsoft Project or a tool like that. And that was how we rolled.
Like, since you started in your career, Nick, like, how has that role evolved from day one? I'm project management or whatever your delivery specialty was when you started, to like how we do things today.
Right. Yeah. So I was going to say that's where I'm going to start with it, because obviously that's a broad spectrum, and while I am a history major, that was really a focus on really 20th century U.S. history. Anyway. I started in like 2007 in the project management game. And, back then a lot of things were Excel. One time we even had an Access database that we were managing like a program portfolio from. Yep. Pretty impressive stuff.
Nice.
Yeah. Whatever you could do to kind of get the thing going. Then, Microsoft Project came into the fold. And obviously these were all tools that were kind of built in that sort of, I want to separate project manager from PMI or waterfall, as it were. Not necessarily PMI, but they were all kind of built with the idea that you have a set of tasks that accomplish a thing at a given date, and you're just kind of checking boxes, as it were. And that, of course, over time evolved into a more iterative approach, which follows sort of the agile mindset. And of course, to do that, you needed to be a little bit more creative, a little bit more lively, and things like Jira started coming into play, and Trello boards and things of that nature, a way to kind of bunch up some stuff to achieve a goal that contributes more towards delivering some features and value to your product as you go. So, there's a whole lot in between. But I think in my world, the evolution was really like, it was so important to get your, PMP certificate and become the certified project manager, who is the gatekeeper of the triple constraints, right? And the triple constraints don't go away, right? So those are scope, cost, and schedule, right? Time, stuff like that. I probably got those right. It's been a while.
Yep.
But in any event, managing those, and of course, those are levers. So if you're going to try to, increase the timeline, usually it's going to cost more money because you're going to want to add more people. And we discovered that isn't always how it works. I think the famous phrase is you can't but make a baby with 9 people in 1 month. You know what I mean? Like it's still, some things still require, what it requires. And so then people started to shift to this agile approach and understanding that software is always alive. It's never done. You can do things quickly. You can see value sooner than at the end, and you can still get to your goal and achieve some much needed value as you get there. It also kind of was giving you a live take into what's going on and allows you to shift quickly. So along with that, tools came with that. I think the capabilities necessary to lead projects expanded in a lot of ways, but also have sort of started to blur quite a bit. So I think that's where we are right now.
We're in the blur zone.
Yeah. I think now there's this concept of product, and a lot of product mindset is very, very parallel to agile mindset. Agile started to take on, I think a perception is agile is Scrum in a lot of our clients and customers and stuff like that. I think is a fair assessment. And then, that's kind of, and then anything that isn't agile must be waterfall, which I also don't think is necessarily correct. So I think we're kind of going through a little phase here where we're trying to figure out what are the actual capabilities, what are the roles needed to achieve some of this stuff, and a lot of other variables go into it too, like teams, size of the project, how many teams are working on it, what is it that you need to achieve, so how many layers and things do you need, how do you manage those triple constraints to ensure that while you're going through the development life cycle, you're not overspending and you're still on target with what you want and you're not veering too far off course while also still achieving what you set out to. I feel like I've said
the business never makes budgets, right? They're more of a annual type thing or a quarterly type thing.
Yeah, a lot of quarterly.
So
sometimes less,
So kind of budgeting still in terms of more of the old school waterfall, but you're not actually doing that. You're doing agile. Is that what you're saying?
So I think what I would say is every project has budget. Every project has ideal timeline. Every budget has, the necessary, resources you need to achieve it, be it people, hardware, anything in between. However, how you get there, I think, is where the agile component comes in. And so when you create sort of an agile approach, an iterative development approach, you usually want to have somebody there who's kind of coaching the team how to do that. Where is it? Why is it that we're doing this way? How do we break these things into smaller increments that are delivering value as we go, rather than finish it all and at the end, let's see what happened, right? We're all familiar with the tire swing
how close
picture.
We got.
Yeah. And so you can do both, but in the past, one role was created to manage those triple constraints while also managing those projects and teams delivering it. But that was more of because it was task driven, right? The PPM tool and all that stuff was more like, what are the things we're about to do? Did we do it? And then we'll look at the software. Now it's more, what is it we want to deliver in this sprint? Are we on target for it? Can we see the software? And then we can decide, did we achieve the spirit of what we meant to do, right? And so it's accepting the fact that there's a certain level of uncertainty and there's a certain level of don't let perfect get in the way of good, because a lot of times perfect wasn't right in the first place, when you set up this project plan.
Perfectly described circle that wasn't round and wasn't the right color anyway. So even if you built it perfectly to spec, it's still wrong, right?
Yeah. So, there's kind of a school of thought or misconception or something that a role morphs into a different role. So you go from project manager to scrum master,
right? And then when you're scrum master, your objective is to get a team oriented, right? You're trying to gather a sort of an empowered, motivated, self-organized team that is actually becoming a master of the domain that they own and contributing regular delivery on that front. And that goes into more about why are we doing this? Like, the whole agile kind of value proposition, if you will, and less about you guys are costing me money or it's due tomorrow or it's, all that stuff. It's more acknowledging that this is sort of a life cycle that we can take value when it's ready. Sometimes it's ready sooner, sometimes it's longer, but there's a trust involved in that you have your professionals that you're working with.
It's a different perspective, right?
It is. And then project managers, though, still, you still have to oversee the whole thing. So most projects aren't one team doing one feature or a couple of features. It's multiple teams across a enterprise, spectrum of software and technology that needs to have some oversight on how everything's going. So there's become sort of a natural divide on what those roles are and who's overseeing it. But then you have, operationally, there's managers and there's all sorts of stuff as well that you have to kind of navigate. Who's in charge here, right? Where are those lines drawn?
Hey, can I ask really quick, like how has advances in the development side, right? So your Scrum Master and product owner and everything else now, like that's instead of a project manager. How does like the whole DevOps revolution from, decade and a half ago and coming up the generative AI revolution, how do those technologies affect what you do as now in your role as like a Scrum Master or agile practitioner or whatever else? Does it have an impact, or are you just adding different people to your team and managing them kind of the same as you would anybody else?
Golly, I think it's very parallel, to be honest with you, right? Like as a Scrum Master, you need to be aware of all the things a project manager is doing and vice versa. Similarly, with your dev team, we become so much better at kind of putting it all on dev team. So you have to design it, you got to code it, you got to, oftentimes you testing it, you got to deploy it, right? And so your definition of done has expanded significantly, and you definitely have to factor those things in when you're doing your planning, whether you're a Scrum Master or a project manager, to be honest with you, because there's less of that handoff. Sometimes there still is, right? And certainly when you get into production, that's oftentimes the case. But it's how we build software and get it across the finish line. Like what you need to do, I don't think has changed necessarily. How you do it has. And so you have to adjust. Where before it might just have been, this team does this piece and we hand it to that team. Now, this team might do a lot more. Address your question. I don't know. That's been my experience.
And like sort of going back in a time machine, waterfall was great when you were producing software on a CD-ROM that you were going to send out somewhere, right? Because once that CD was burned, it was done, and you weren't going to change it again until the next release, whatever that was. Whereas the web or, in-house software or easily or continuously deployed software, the definition of done or of a feature or of a aspect of that software changes quite a bit. Like, well, we think it's good enough to go, so let's go, and we'll fix it as we go.
It almost
and
seems
there has
like,
been
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No,
I was going to say, it
ahead.
almost seems like it almost seems like some of the technologies that we work with day to day as we're developing products evolve along with the framework that we're using to develop them, right? Like Agile, the cloud helps an Agile software project way more than waterfall, right? Because we can deploy faster. We can deploy, like DevOps does the same thing for us, right? We can deploy faster without thinking about it. We can deploy products in a sprint and actually show meaningful value because of some of the technologies that have grown up with Agile and Scrum and the whole product mindset.
Yeah,
Right, I don't even know.
Taking that whole infrastructure piece out of the equation where you have direct access to the back end without having to go through some giant change control process and have other teams come in and do things. You kind of have that direct access, which gives you a lot of speed. So as roles have transformed, technology kind of can transform roles as well. And so like automated QA. So your QA person of 5 years ago doesn't work the same way, or the QA person of today doesn't work the same way or have the same needs as the QA person 10 years ago. Manual QA has become automated QA. And now when a QA person needs a laptop from me, I have to give them a big machine, superpowers and stuff. So that kind of changed things. And I think also the idea that, one role can become another role, like a project manager gets promoted to a department manager, or a project, could a project manager become a product owner? Product is built and transitioned to kind of that next phase of product ownership. Is that confusing? I'm sorry.
No.
That's a good question for you, Nick. Like, where did the traditional project manager, where did they go in this new system?
Well, again, this is all we all probably have an answer to this, and I'd be curious to hear what you all say as developers, to be honest with you. Where were they in the first place? No, well, a lot of them did shift into this whole Scrum Master role. Some went into product. They're still our project manager.
Sure.
In the classic sense. So when we're talking about this, I'm thinking about a project manager. I think we've already said it, right? Somebody who is managing the health of the entire project itself. There are a lot of software development things that aren't projects anymore. They've turned into products. So they're still invested in, and so they might call them projects, but they are product funded. And so they are basically, they've hired teams, permanent teams, with the idea being that they are going to work on the next high value, outcome that we're looking for. And it's a matter of prioritizing what it is you want to do in that product that aligns with your business's objectives and vision and all that fun stuff. Those are different models because you kind of know what your spend rate is going to be. You know who you have. So the question is not those two things. It's more of what are we going to do with it? And that's why a lot of the metrics out of like a Scrum project are more about team performance and less about the project status of things. So you're doing demos, that's your status, as it were. Predictability, which is what velocity is what's important. So understanding when a team estimates, if it's reliable, then you know how much value you can get in a given sprint, in a given quarter, and that can help the product owner in this case, or whoever's deciding what the product roadmap would be, what's going to be doable, what's going to be feasible. But you still have to do the things like we have to factor in not just the challenge. I think, Chad, you mentioned it earlier a little bit, but the challenge has been as we add more responsibility and make tools that make that responsibility a little easier to development, the term development has also shifted. So much like we're talking about project management and Scrum, development is not typing code, right? But yet that's been the perception still to this day. I think some of the biggest value I bring in as a project leader, if we will, is expressing that when we talk about development, it is literally that. Development is the design, it's the conception, it's designing the solution. It's, yes, coding it, but that should probably be the least of our, efforts, or at least
that's the last step, right?
Yeah. And then of course, making sure it's tested and deployable, buildable, right? A lot of times we're spending most of our time troubleshooting why a build failed, or why an integration isn't all of a sudden working in one of our environments, so we can't test it. It's not actually about the coding and stuff. So similarly, I think everybody's roles in this are shifting around. But in my experience, you still need somebody who has kind of their focus on the impacts of all that effort toward that end, whether it is you're managing a roadmap that you're trying to achieve or delivery on a date or what have you. It doesn't matter. You still need somebody who understands the overall objectives and can see what the teams are doing and report back where those issues are coming from. Maybe we were blocked for a week because a team that we were dependent upon, couldn't help us. Well, that's going to affect your, that's going to affect your ability to deliver, whether you're running agile or not. So somebody's still got to be there to see it, notice it, understand its impact, while everybody else is focusing on what they do best, which is solving those problems and creating those cool features. Kind of merges together. It's just how you title it, how you call it, what you call it. Companies are using a lot of creativity. They think they want a Scrum Master when they need a project manager. They think they want a project manager when really they're looking for a Scrum Master or a program manager. I mean, it's, at the end of the day, I think it really comes down to what are the capabilities you're looking for in this role, and the title is less important.
And what the perspective of that role is, right? Like, are you looking for team performance? Are you looking for managing timelines or budget or something strictly different cares of different positions?
I think it happens, it's not infrequent, probably more infrequent than it used to be, and kind of dependent on the technology. But what I used to experience with doing SharePoint work was the customer thought they needed one type of person and with a skill set, and they really didn't. They needed a different type of person. So I would I'd see a request come in, and it's like 5 years of .NET development experience and all that, like all these superpowers they'd want you to be everything. And like, well, actually, this is all going to happen on the front end, and the project isn't going to run the same because this is not really developing with code. It's not true development, but they think it should be. So they want like a dev, test, and release server, and they want it to be like get developers involved. It's like, no, I can just go in and whip this up for you. Like, what you're asking for is kind of like having someone come in and create a really nice Word document. And I don't need to build Word to do it. It's more configuring than anything. And then I've had projects where we've stripped away like the team, shrunk it down. It's like we don't, you've got all these people, and it turns out that I need to be in the room because I need to express the limitations of the tool and what it means to do stuff, because we're in the confines of what Microsoft builds and what works of what they built. So I'm kind of doing the BA stuff. So having me in the room and a BA might not be necessary. And I've had that where I'm the last man standing on the project.
This is a question for everybody. On that note, Kyle, like some of the trouble I get into as an SDG consultant with kind of a lot of experience and a lot of understanding of all these different roles, when I walk into a place that either has the roles already or is building out team with those roles, is whether or not I'm welcome in that space. So similarly in development, it could be QA, it could be DevOps, it could be architecture, it could be a lot of things that how do you navigate when it's either pretty well defined but maybe isn't going as well as you think? So like how do you balance the consultant part from I'm trying to do this job part with, the rest of it, right? Which ultimately we're all trying to solve problems and create awesome solutions that make things, easier and more effective. But your heart's in the right place, but do you run into, how do you navigate those waters?
I mean, a lot of times different things are presented to you as this is how we're doing it. Like we're using this architecture. We're going to do client server architecture for this. Oh, okay. But not microservices because those would make sense here, or like you really want this only because you,
Peter.
Well, but they've picked an architecture that may or may not make sense for the problem that they're solving, and maybe haven't experienced the pain of trying to solve the problem with that architecture as Chad or I have. Like, oh yeah, we've tried to solve it with that old technology or that different methodology, but the new stuff works so much better. Why wouldn't we do this?
And I think on my end, it depends on the size of the organization that you're working with too, right? Like it seems like the smaller the organization, the appetite for shiny new objects is bigger than if you're at an old, like not old, but if you're at a massive monolithic company, well, I mean, then they have different problems to solve, right? Like they have to worry about supportability. They've got to worry about all these other post-delivery issues that, me and Peter might want to use,
right.
AWS microservices all over the place. I have to hand that off to some poor fellow that has to support this down the road. So we can't
Right.
build like this Rube Goldberg machine of an application and say, yeah, I'll draw it out. It all looks perfect. Now I'm going to leave and go, do this again somewhere else. Now we are constrained by, those, like what Peter says, it's not a negative thing, right? Like they might want to build a monolith, right? That's great. We'll do that. And we're going to deliver, but you also have to support the monolith once you leave. And that's, I think, what a lot of these folks think of when you're proposing like every new thing under the sun. You don't have a track record of maintaining something new and shiny. So it's
Right.
a little scary.
I mean, the fact is that you're brought in and it might be at a point where they've already been sold on something. And like seriously, it's clicked in their heads that this is the way. This is what we're doing. And so, we can work with that. We're not going to, fight you on it. We're going to make some recommendations and shine some light on some things and do our best to like educate if it's not the right solution. But when people are sold on stuff, it's hard to change their minds. And there also might be reasons that you don't know about and that they don't really want to tell you about.
Yeah.
There might be budgetary things that have happened. They might have gotten locked into something, or this is the platform we're on. And so this is the thing that ties into that. So we're going to use it. Or we don't want custom code.
Yeah, it's like the art of consulting, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
if you don't say anything,
You haven't
you're just
done your
doing
job
your
either.
job. I don't
Right.
exactly right. If you do say something but you don't let up, at some point you have to understand where you're welcome to and not welcome to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I still think we err on the side of what about or why not or,
My
just get an
mindset,
answer, right?
I grew up reading comic books and, my mindset is always like, I want to come in and be the hero. I'm going to walk through the door and your mission is going to be my mission. I know who I'm working for, and I know who, like, I'm working for your company. I'm working for your organization. That's where my loyalty is. That's who I want to make sure is getting the best information they can. I would labor over like making sure that the answer I gave was correct. research and, spending long nights at home, digging through it. Because if I didn't know or wasn't familiar with it, then I had to kick it into high gear to figure that stuff out. But it wasn't like I didn't want to fight them on that stuff. I just wanted to help them get it done and see their vision through to the end the best way I knew how. But I've been on projects with multiple consulting firms involved, and coming in mid-project, things like that. And then they've taken it so far, but I'm coming in to fill in for full-time positions, so it's kind of staff augmentation. So I'm playing that role in my head. I'm not coming in, in that case, I'm not really coming in as an outsider. I'm coming in as part of this department, part of this team. I'm fitting into that role. It's like trying to understand what your role is. And I've had it where I've been asked not to speak in meetings, we're this far, these are our decisions, things like that. And then someone looks at me and says, "What do you think?" And I work for them. And they asked me what I thought. And so I told them. And, because that's, it's a tough thing. Because you got pressure put on you and opinions and things like that. And it's well, or being asked, how is this person doing in their role? Mm-hmm. A person in leadership, has one of their employees taking on that role, and then they bring me in, and it's evaluate their skills. Are they the right person for this job?
That's a good one. Yeah. That's a good one, especially in, I don't know how much you all run into, I'm sure you do, sort of the managerial role, right? So in project management, you don't have direct reports usually. You have members on this project. And similarly, that Scrum Master is not a manager, right?
It's not in the title.
And yet you are working with everybody, trying to develop these, you are managing people, not direct reports. You are trying to get a team kind of working together. So it is more of that coaching role versus I'm in charge here, right? It's more motivational, and yet you can run into those. Those are some good scope creeps on these job, positions of asking how are people doing, or not being asked, and all of a sudden somebody on your team's gone or something like that, and you're like, well, wait a minute, why did that happen, and why wasn't I consulted? And and so it's another one of those kind of slippery slopes. But those roles, they're important, and I think it's certainly indicative of whether or not you kind of have the ear of who you're working with, whether you have that direct power or not. But very rarely, if ever, have you had, I don't know if people have gotten hired to be a manager and actually do the hiring and firing of people. I've been in interviews certainly and had a lot of opinion asked for.
Lots of interviews, but not necessarily straight hiring decisions. But you can certainly give your opinion that will be a mistake if you hire that person.
I've been in that exact position where I was looking over resumes, and the role they were asked, the position they had posted for and the team they were going to add that person, it was not what they needed. It was, and then getting a resume of somebody that was not in the role they posted for, but was exactly the person they needed. And then I was just begging, please hire this person. They're going to be great at this stuff. And then having them listen to me and having it work out, but then kind of having to defend a role.
It goes both ways.
Maybe someone is a little rough around the edges. Maybe they don't filter very well and they come across being very blunt, and there's complaints that happen. Maybe that person is me. I don't know. But it's well, this is, this project requires a firm hand. It requires some push. No, actually, this person is doing the right stuff, and this is the person you need to do this. So kind of being in that position where you're guiding things in the right direction.
Where do you think this is going, right? So we've kind of talked about, we started with nothing, and then, the project management hammer came down, and then it's adjusted into agile and scrum. And now we've got, AI is the big thing, and is that, but where do we actually think this is going? Like this week, actually on Monday, the learning or the delivery practice had a lunch and learn. Shout out to Travis and Jennifer there for leading that, and everybody who participated about hybrid roles on Scrum Master and Project Manager. So this is actually a very pertinent subject across everybody's minds. And I kind of liken it to, it's sort of like Star Wars, where you start with only Jedi and only Sith. It's like, sort of orthodox, if you will. And now they're starting to kind of gray it up a little bit where, well, maybe it's not so harsh, but you're all, just kind of flex where your passions draw, but don't go too far. And, for the nerds out there, the gray Jedi, as it were, but that's kind of what's happening now. That's kind of what's happening in our roles, where people are looking for, look, I need somebody who can manage my project, but also sort of build, develop, and run teams in a, I'll say Scrum-like nature, but certainly in an iterative-like nature. Where do you guys think it's going?
I think that because I don't think I've ever been on a project where I wasn't a hybrid, wearing multiple hats, or even, like the job I have now. There's a number of things that I do. And so there's, consider desktop support, service management, training. Like there's a lot of things that I'm involved in. Podcaster, videographer. But I think that it's really, it's not the role as much as the person. We need a fighter pilot that's going to go where the action is.
Sure, but it's hard to hire magic hammers.
Right. And Nick, going back to your point, like these blended roles can sometimes work out just fine depending on the person, right? But there's also the blended roles that you see that are just a disaster, right? Mm-hmm. Like, they don't do Scrum Manager well or Project Manager well. They do both poorly because they're being drawn to different ends, right? So they're not able to trade that hat and focus on that position at one time. Half-heartedly focus on both. And a project manager that has a deadline, but a Scrum Master that has a deadline is much worse, right? Hey guys, we're falling behind. Let's go faster.
Yeah. And maybe your developer / QA is not the right mix, or at least it didn't used to be. But now with automation,
never.
QAing your own stuff
ever has been a good idea. Nobody's ever thought like, hey, let's get rid of our QA department and have our developers all test their own stuff. Because the only reason you brought in a QA developer was because the developers were so poor at it.
Well, it does happen though, Peter. Test-driven development. There's been some movements in some spaces where
I'm not saying that developers shouldn't write tests and that they shouldn't code, but I'm saying that the full QA, UAT, whatever, developers have a very path-driven mindset. This code works perfectly when I don't try to order, peppermint patties at the bowling alley for, using beers or whatever. If that's not mixed up enough.
Yeah, I had a couple forms I built for the PTO carryover stuff where people were putting in amounts, and I had a QA person take a look at it, and they're putting in negative numbers. They're putting they're going, so much stuff got worked out because they went way off how I thought it was going to be used.
And please don't mistake me by saying that I am
that you're
a proponent for no QA. QA is at the value prop for that is justified. Yes, absolutely. And of course, the objective is, the end user is having the smoothest, most positive experience ever. So,
right.
It's critical. However, it does happen, and
I agree.
You can either feel the pain the hard way, or you can, entirely and enhance your product, frankly, because a lot of things are found, not just what's broken, but what might work better.
But then also identifying, go ahead, Chad.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, if we're talking about the evolution of roles, we're focusing on Nick's delivery role, but evolution of the QA role too over the last 2 decades has been insane, right? We talked about automation earlier. What's coming next is the whole QA role in the AI world, right? Like how do you QA an artificial intelligence, like a generative model, right? Like what is I can't even. I was listening to a podcast over the weekend, Practical AI. Highly recommended. And they talked about that exact problem, right? Like every other software product that we build, we have there's a nice kind of established baseline for what QA could probably look like, right? Some manual, some automated, some a mix between the two, and then like Kyle was saying, the chaos monkey that throws in negative values in a PT or whatever form you were doing, right? AI is it's going to be insane trying to QA that. You're going to have to use a generative model to QA a brand new model. It's incredible.
So you got to use AI to QA AI.
To a degree, yeah. You have to have, what folks are doing is they're standing up models next to each other. This one's trained this way, this one's trained this way. They're comparing outputs, and then they're using competitors' models with the same prompts to say, oh, okay, here's what they're getting. And then it's not necessarily a pass-fail. It's a kind of a graded scale. Yeah, exactly. Like this is
so the thing that's supposed to be able to look at
mind.
something and say, yes, this was generated like ChatGPT, like people writing papers with it, and then instructors having to make sure that they didn't use that tool to write it. Is that like another AI that's doing that?
It is.
All right.
I mean,
that was just my
it's
question. Not really
another
related
form
to
of things.
our topic.
Just tracking down.
Yeah.
I think this is a good one because that's where we're headed, right? I mean, I don't know, Chat. I don't know. How do you? And who gets to say we went live with it because it was good enough for our queue? That's a lot of pressure, because especially with what could go wrong. Now, some AI, I assume, probably is a little bit more confined to what it does, right? Like not all AI is as broad in its spectrum as a Chat GPT, which is open to the public to do anything, ask it anything and do anything. But some of the things that we would be working with are a little bit more focused. Is that a fair?
Yeah. The thing I see like with trying to QA AI is it's so good at being articulate when delivering bad information. Like it sounds great, but it's wrong. So you would really have to understand what the right answer is before you're even asking the question.
Yeah, and with the generative models that we're talking about, right? Like that's one specific AI, right? So you might not necessarily even be assessing the answer that it gave you, right? We did this at OSN where we were talking about dive bars and all the answers were articulate but incorrect. But I think that the goal with a lot of these is it an articulate answer? Is it a fair answer? And is it depending on how the model was trained and what data it was trained with, is it actually providing the right source for, the right, not necessarily the perfect answer? Like ChatGPT is going to get a lot of stuff wrong because they're seeded and trained with such a wide, massive data set. But when we start deploying these individually, we're going to train them a lot tighter on our own data, and we'll be able to definitively say, yes, this is a correct answer. No, this is not a correct answer.
Writing this quote down right now.
I understand you're a smooth talking, charming AI, but you're wrong.
Right.
I mean, a lot of it goes back to how well did you define the problem? Do you really know the correct answer? Or do you just know an answer that looks good? We want to make more money. Okay. Means do you want to make more money? Manufacturing or some sort of weird money trading, Bitcoin or something like that? Is that like whatever you choose, you have to be able to define your problem. And traditionally, businesses are very good at recognizing the solution that they want once you get there, but not the path that it's going to take to get there, which I think is what brings Agile so much better to the front, is that you can make those course corrections all the way through. You might end up on Island B when you were targeting Island A at the start, but Island B is the place that you want to be, right? Mm-hmm. So I think, as these things morph and all of this stuff changes, it traditionally comes down to how well do you write your problem statement? How well does your acceptance criteria, is it clear, concise, or is it we feel like we want something
So does that defining your acceptance criteria, defining requirements, understanding how you're going to test, make sure that you're delivering the right thing? Is the planning for all that going to be less, or is it less with Agile, Scrum, product ownership? Because I used
I
to
would say
hear
it's
like
more.
80% of your project should be planning. I don't know if that's true or not, but I used to hear something like that.
That's the waterfall. I mean,
Yeah.
it's still kind of true, right? You should really have a pretty clear picture of where you are trying to go, whether you're thinking 6 months out or you're thinking tomorrow. Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? If you're not sure where you're going, then we probably shouldn't start until we are. So there definitely needs to be. I'll kind of run that back. There definitely needs to be more focus on that time to kind of uncover. And there is generally still, especially working in a contractor environment, a want to start typing stuff to show I can do. I'm doing something to justify why I'm here. That's tangible. And oftentimes the planning and collaborating and kind of designing and going through the thought process, it's not as tangible, so it feels wasteful. But there really isn't anything more valuable than at least doing that, as long as you don't get that. And again, it's all great. Don't get the analysis paralysis, but don't not do it either. And
Right.
sometimes you got to get started just to see what you don't know.
I
But
think
you
that's
should have that
where,
carved into your plan too, which is
Yeah.
a very agile tenet.
I think that's why assessments are so valuable. Coming in and figuring out the landscape and what the business needs are, and like what the goals are, kind of the strategy and what they're driving to. It's a really good start, I think, to your planning process, and it's your chance to kind of settle in on your technology and kind of what you need to have. So what's the right role for somebody to do an assessment? Like, who needs to be doing that?
What are we assessing? Are we
Right.
assessing,
So you're going to develop some new software to replace some old software.
Well, I mean, you're going to want, somebody in charge of that, right? Who's going to be responsible for putting it all together, but you're going to need some players underneath to kind of help understand some of that. Like what, a project manager, or a delivery person, say, myself, if I were to do it, I would have to, my job is going to be creating probably the artifact, right? But what goes into the artifact is going to be, again, a team game. I need to have the specialists and the people who understand software and architecture and design to know confidently what we're going to achieve. So I know what team members we're going to need. That's going to drive what kind of costs we're going to have. Certainly the software or the architecture, the network, where are we going to put it? Are we host it? That's going to also drive costs. So I'm going to need, assistance with that. As far as what the overall output would be, that's probably going to be in charge of one person. Who's contributing to it would be a field of many, right? Depending on the size and scope of what it is, much like any other project. But ultimately, you got to have some sort of baseline or foundation that you're trying to achieve. So you at least have something to compare, because that creates the language to have the discussion on, is where we wanted to be still where we want to go, or is where we are actually more valuable, or did where we get to, it turns out, wasn't what we were expecting, but it's going to be better because we're going to pivot now. And
Right.
Doing that more frequently is the only way you can have a healthy means to an end, right? And if you're doing it in a way that's creating working software, you can see that now rather than waiting until the end. You can deploy it, you know what I mean? You can get it going. So
Right.
even while you're thinking through maybe what the end state will be, you might be able to start gleaning some of that value earlier.
Yeah. And now with the product approach, where you're going to have a project to produce a product, you kind of have to have that product thinking involved early.
Definitely. And that's that's a space that's really, it's not easy. It is not something that's a role. I mean, to be honest with you, product owner role, I see more frequently that a subject matter expert in the business gets promoted to a product owner, who doesn't maybe fully understand. They might understand their business and how it's been done, but they may not understand the technology available to them to make something totally, creative and awesome. They're stuck in kind of what they know. instead of thinking about what's possible. And I think some of the challenges that we see, whether we're a Scrum Master or a project manager or otherwise, is who's deciding where we're going and how we're getting there, because that is so critical to any organization. And I think making sure that we have somebody in that space who understands that role is and I think the evolution of that is also, paramount to success.
I think your statement about SMEs becoming product owners, sometimes it works out really well, right? You see amazing product owners that came from being subject matter experts, and sometimes it's just really a disaster.
And what makes them awesome, though, Peter, in your opinion, when that happens, right?
They're given the power to make decisions and drive that product forward into places that it doesn't already exist.
Yeah.
And they've been using the product enough and say, I really think the product needs to do this, and I'm going to make it happen.
Yeah, and I've seen, you look at just being an SME, not that that's a small thing, but then becoming more than that, a higher visibility, kind of leveling up, it's a different thing. And you have to have the right person. Like I used to see project managers get turned into people managers, like department managers, supervisors, and it didn't always work. I know the first project where I was made a lead, it went right to my head, and I became a power mad. Okay, I don't want to lead anymore. I don't want to manage anybody. I think it's kind of the right person that can make that transition. And I think sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. That's my parting thought, because we're running out of time. And so I think, Nick, you had a good parting thought. Any other nuggets you want to toss out there before we shut her down?
I'd like to hear from Chad or Peter. What do you guys have?
Go ahead, Peter. You go first.
My parting thought is that roles are going to change as the development life cycle changes, and those that do it and make those changes faster will be better off in the long run.
Yeah, I think not to be contrarian, but we're going to be doing the same thing in 10 years, right? We're just going to shuffle the deck chairs around a little bit and call it something else. And we might find tiny little efficiencies by doing something mildly different.
Right.
Yeah, roles change and titles change and all that. But essentially, we're still delivering software products. We're just adding people in the process of that delivery now. And that's great. It makes me more efficient as a developer to have a really, really good Scrum Master, way more than a really good project manager, right? A really great Scrum manager, agile practitioner, way more useful to a product team than really, really great project manager. Those are great roles, but yeah, there's a lot of value that Scrum Master can give us. So
I disagree. I think by then I'll be like a level 10 Six Sigma black belt.
It all
Some
contributes.
kind of new,
right?
A whole new thing that we've never seen before. A whole new role.
I think it's just important that everybody knows there's building teams and developing the solutions, and there's still managing the levers of business, right? And
right.
The same person can do that, right? If they're capable enough, and or want to and can learn it and just understand the nuance and differences of coaching a team versus managing a project, right? So my parting thought on it. Nothing evolves faster than software development.
Yeah,
that's true.
Nick, thanks for joining us again. It's always a pleasure to have you on the podcast. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
And I think with that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, everybody.
goodbye.
Goodbye.
Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.